At 9:12 on a freezing December morning, my daughter-in-law shoved a black duffel bag into my chest and yelled, "Take your junk and get out, buyers are coming." My son stood beside her, silent. I walked through the snow, believing the bag held only old clothes. But at an empty bus stop, I opened it and found a missing man's video camera, a burner phone, and 2 warehouse keys. Then the phone buzzed with one terrifying message. "I'm truly grateful you're here for this one." Before we go any further, drop a comment and let me know what are you doing while listening. Driving, working, or taking a moment for yourself, I read every comment, and they mean more than you know. Quick note. Some details are fictionalized to strengthen the lesson. What matters most is the message it carries. The heavy black duffel bag hit me squarely in the chest, knocking the breath from my 70-year-old lungs. I stumbled backward, shoulder colliding with the doorframe of the Nashville home I had purchased with my late wife's life insurance. The house I had foolishly signed over to my son's name 3 years ago, believing that trust and blood meant something. "Shaw, take your trash and get out of my house." Gail said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. My daughter-in-law stood in the hallway, 38 years old, and dressed in designer clothes that cost more than my monthly pension. Her perfectly styled hair didn't move as she pointed toward the door. "The realtor is bringing buyers in 20 minutes, and we can't have you sitting around looking pathetic." Behind her, my son Brent stood silent. 42 years old, wearing a suit that probably cost $2,000, and he wouldn't meet my eyes. I raised him, changed his diapers, taught him to ride a bike, paid for his college even when money was tight. "Brent," I said quietly. "Son, Dad just..." He finally looked at me, and there was something in his face I didn't recognize. Something cold. "Go to the coffee shop for a while. We'll text you when the viewing's done." Gail grabbed my arm, not gently, and steered me toward the front door. The December morning air hit me like a slap. Snow had started falling an hour earlier, and the temperature hovered somewhere around 28 degrees. I was wearing house slippers and a thin cardigan. "Wait," I said. "My coat. Everything you need is in the bag." Gail shoved me onto the front porch. "Don't come back until we call you." The door slammed. The deadbolt clicked. I stood there on the porch I had built with my own hands 15 years ago, staring at the wreath Diane and I had picked out together before she died. The black duffel bag lay at my feet where it had fallen. Snow collected in my hair. This was the house I bought when Diane's leukemia finally took her. The insurance money, $230,000, had been meant for me to rest, to grieve, to not worry about rent in my old age. But Brent had convinced me to buy this place, and then convinced me to put it in his name for estate planning purposes. He said it would save on taxes. He said it was smart. I believed him. I picked up the bag and walked down the driveway, my slippers soaking through in the snow. My truck was gone. Brent had taken it to the shop 3 days ago and never brought it back. The bus stop sat at the end of Elm Street, 6 houses down. 6 houses I'd walked past 1,000 times, waving to neighbors living a quiet retirement. The wind cut through my cardigan like it wasn't there. I reached the bus stop shelter and collapsed onto the frozen bench, gasping. My chest ached where the bag had hit me. My hands shook from cold or rage or heartbreak, I couldn't tell. I unzipped the duffel bag, hoping Gail had at least thrown in my winter coat. She hadn't. Inside the bag was a video camera, a flip phone I'd never seen before, and a key ring with 2 keys attached, labeled in faded marker, "Warehouse number 7. I stared at the camera. It wasn't mine. I lifted it out slowly, and my stomach dropped. The camera belonged to Howard Bentley. Howard was my neighbor 2 doors down, 65 years old, a quiet man who'd lived on Elm Street even longer than I had. We'd shared beers on summer evenings and complained about property taxes and talked about our late wives. 6 months ago, Howard had disappeared. Just gone one morning, his house dark, his truck missing. The police had investigated, briefly found no signs of foul play, and eventually labeled him a voluntary missing person. But Howard would never have left voluntarily. He loved that house. He loved his garden. And now his camera was in my hands. How does a man raise a son for 42 years, only to watch him stand silent, while his wife throws his father into the December cold? I turned on the camera with numb fingers. The battery icon showed half full. The last video file was dated 6 months ago, June 23rd, the night Howard disappeared. I pressed play. The footage was dark and shaky, filmed at night. 3 figures moved in and out of frame, illuminated by truck headlights. They were loading pallets of what looked like construction materials onto a pickup truck. The camera angle was low, like Howard had been hiding behind something. "Shine the light over here," a voice said. Male, familiar. "We need to load this before the CSX line runs." My blood turned to ice. That was Wade Mercer's voice, Brent's best friend since high school. "Did you hear something?" Another voice. Brent's voice. Behind the truck, the camera jerked violently, then the image went black. But the audio kept recording. Footsteps, heavy breathing, a struggle. "What the hell?" That was Howard's voice, scared. "Wade, Brent, what are you? Grab him!" A third voice, female and cold. "Gail." More struggling. A crash. Then silence except for the distant sound of a train horn, the CSX freight line that ran through Berry Hill 2 miles south. 11 church bells chimed in the distance. 11 o'clock at night. Then Gail's voice again, calm as if she were ordering coffee. "Take the old neighbor to the old warehouse by the tracks. Tonight." The recording ended. I sat there, camera clutched in my shaking hands, snow falling around the bus shelter. For the first time in 3 years since Diane died, I felt something besides grief. I felt the cold, calculated clarity of a man who had spent 40 years as a forensic accountant, hunting down criminals in ledger books and bank statements. I opened the flip phone. It was a burner, prepaid, no name attached. The kind people used when they didn't want to be traced. Then it buzzed in my hand. A text message lit up the tiny screen. 4 words in all caps. "Is the old man gone yet?" I looked from the phone to the camera to the warehouse keys. My breath misted in the freezing air. Someone was waiting for confirmation that I had left. Someone needed me out of the way. And Gail had just handed me all their secrets in a black duffel bag she'd called trash. The question wasn't whether to call the police. It was whether I could live with myself if calling them got Howard killed. I stared at the burner phone, that text message still glowing on the tiny screen. "Is the old man gone yet?" Someone was waiting for confirmation. Someone needed me out of the way. And somewhere in this city, my neighbor was being held captive because he'd filmed something he wasn't supposed to see. My finger hovered over the power button on my own phone, ready to dial 911. Then I stopped. 40 years as a forensic accountant had taught me to think in sequences, in cause and effect. If I called the police right now, what would happen? They'd send a patrol car. Maybe 2. They'd ask questions, take statements, want to see the video. That would take, 20 minutes? 30. And the moment those flashing lights appeared in my driveway, the moment uniformed officers walked through that door, Brent's phone would ring. Whoever sent that text was monitoring the situation. They'd know within minutes that something had gone wrong. And Howard, wherever he was, would become a liability instead of a hostage. The video had said, "Tonight. Take the old neighbor to the old warehouse." That meant Howard was still alive. They were planning to move him after dark, probably to a more permanent location. Which gave me hours, maybe 8, maybe 10. Enough time to find the warehouse myself. "If I call now, they'll know," I said quietly to the empty bus shelter. "Brent's phone will ring. They'll move Howard or worse." Snow fell harder now, collecting on the bench beside me. My slippers were soaked through my feet, numb. But my mind was working with a clarity I hadn't felt in 3 years, not since Diane died, and grief had wrapped itself around my chest like a vice. The video says tonight. I have hours. Maybe enough time to find the warehouse. I looked at the key ring in my hand. Warehouse number 7. The audio had mentioned the CSX line, the freight tracks that ran through Berry Hill. There were 3 industrial complexes along that stretch. I could check them all in an afternoon if I was smart about it. Diane always said I thought like a chess player, I whispered. Move counter move 3 steps ahead. Time to prove her right. I made my decision. I wouldn't call the police. Not yet. Not until I knew where Howard was and could tell them exactly where to go fast enough that the conspirators couldn't react. Instead, I was going to go back to that house, pretend I suspected nothing, and become invisible while I planned my next move. I pulled out my regular phone and called a cab. You might wonder why a 70-year-old man would choose vigilante justice over a simple 911 call. The answer is simple. I'd already lost my wife. I wasn't going to lose my friend to my son's greed. The taxi arrived 15 minutes later, a yellow Crown Victoria with a driver who didn't ask questions, when I climbed in, wearing wet slippers and no coat. I gave him my address and spent the ride rehearsing. Defeated posture, slumped shoulders, red-rimmed eyes easy enough since the cold had already made them water, voice weak and apologetic. The persona of a confused old man who'd been thrown out in the snow and had nowhere else to go. They expected me to be pathetic. I'd give them pathetic. The cab pulled up to my house at 10:43 a.m. I paid with trembling hands, not all of it was an act, and shuffled up the driveway like a man 30 years older than I was. The black duffel bag hung heavy over my shoulder. I knocked on my own front door. Brent opened it, irritation flashing across his face before he could hide it. Dad, I thought you were going to the coffee shop. I went to the one on 5th. I said, my voice thin and shaky. But it was closed. The snow, I think. I didn't know where else to go. He stared at me. The coffee shop on 5th, Dad, that place has been open every day for 20 years. Even Christmas. I let my shoulders sag even further. Maybe I got the streets confused. The cold makes it hard to think. I gestured weakly at my soaked slippers. I'll just sit in my room. You won't even know I'm here. For a long moment, Brent just looked at me. I could see him calculating, weighing whether it was worth the fight to throw me out again. Behind him, I caught a glimpse of the living room, no buyers, no realtor. The showing had been a lie. They'd just wanted me gone. Fine, he said, finally stepping aside. But stay in the back bedroom. Gail's in a mood. Thank you, son, I said quietly, shuffling past him. I walked down the hallway to the small bedroom that had become mine after I'd signed over the house. It was barely 10 feet by 10 feet, with a single bed and a dresser. I closed the door most of the way, but not all the way. Left it cracked about 3 inches. Enough to hear, enough to watch. I sat on the edge of the bed, the duffel bag at my feet, and waited. In the living room, I heard Brent pacing. Then the sound of a phone being dialed. His voice was too low to make out words, but the tone was tense. Anxious. The call went to voicemail. He hung up. 30 seconds passed. He dialed again. 40 years hunting fraud had taught me one truth. The best disguise is the costume people already expect you to wear. They saw a defeated old man. Let them keep seeing it. I lay back on the bed, perfectly still, listening. Brent dialed a 3rd time. This time when it went to voicemail, I heard him swear under his breath. "Where the hell are you?" he muttered. "Pick up your damn phone." I shifted slightly, just enough to see through the crack in the door. Brent stood in the living room, phone pressed to his ear, his free hand running through his hair. When the voicemail beeped, he hung up without leaving a message. He stared at the phone screen for a long moment. Then he looked down the hallway toward my room. His hand shook slightly as he raised the phone to dial again. He didn't know I had the bag yet, but he was starting to suspect something had gone very, very wrong. The unfamiliar voice drifting through the thin wall made me freeze mid-breath deep, confident laughing at something Brent had said. I lay perfectly still on the narrow bed, eyes closed, breathing slow and steady. The person Brent had been trying to reach for the past 3 hours had finally arrived. "Took you long enough," Brent said, tension clear in his voice. "I've been calling since 11. Phone died. What's the emergency?" The new voice belonged to a man probably mid-40s with the easy drawl of someone who'd lived in Nashville his whole life. Wade Mercer. Had to be. Brent's best friend since high school, the third voice on Howard's video. "The emergency," Gail said sharply, "is that we threw him out this morning with a bag, and I haven't been able to find the other one since." "What other one?" "The black duffel, the one from the closet." A pause. Then Wade laughed. "You're kidding!" Do I sound like I'm kidding?" Gail snapped. Through the crack in my door, I watched Wade Mercer walk into view. 43 years old, wearing expensive jeans and a leather jacket that probably cost more than my monthly pension. He had the confident smile of a man who believed himself untouchable. I'd seen that smile before on executives I'd helped send to prison for securities fraud. "Where's the old man now?" Wade asked. Brent gestured down the hallway toward my room. "Back bedroom. He came back an hour ago, said the coffee shop was closed." Wade walked closer to the hallway, and I closed my eyes completely, letting my mouth fall slightly open, breathing with the deep rhythm of sleep. After a moment, I heard him walk back to the living room. "We'll leave him," Wade said dismissively. "He's 70 years old and half deaf. Even if he heard something, what's he going to do? Call the cops and tell them his son is mean to him? But the bag, he probably has his winter coat and some old magazines in it. Stop panicking." Wade's voice shifted to business. "The final shipment goes out on the 23rd. 5 days. Then we're clear and you can do whatever you want with this place. We need the house papers signed by the 26th, Gail said. Boxing Day. Perfect timing while everyone's distracted with post-Christmas sales." "And the other situation?" Brent asked quietly. "Handled," Wade said. "After the 23rd, none of this matters. They say you can't teach an old dog new tricks, but what they don't tell you is that an old dog already knows every trick in the book, and a few more the young ones haven't learned yet." I waited until Wade left at 3:30 p.m. Waited until Brent and Gail went upstairs for their afternoon routine. Waited until the house was quiet except for the sound of pipes settling and the furnace kicking on. Then I got up, retrieved the camera from the duffel bag, and went to the kitchen. I sat at the table where Diane and I had eaten breakfast for 15 years, put on the reading glasses I kept in my shirt pocket, and played that 47-second video over and over again. Not the visual, I'd seen enough of that. The audio. I closed my eyes and listened. Train horn. 3 long blasts, 2 short. CSX mainline distinctive pattern I'd heard 1,000 times when I worked logistics for Caldwell Construction Supply. That particular sequence meant westbound freight passing through Radnor Yard. That horn pattern. I whispered to myself, 3 long, 2 short. CSX mainline through Radnor Yard. I delivered there for 15 years. I played it again. Listened past the voices, past the struggle to the background. 11 bells deep and resonant. A church with a large bell tower close enough for the sound to carry clearly. "Those 11 bells means a large church," I said quietly. "Only 3 churches that size within 2 kilometers of Radnor St. Mark's First Baptist and Sacred Heart." I pulled out my phone and brought up a map of East Nashville. Drew an imaginary circle around the CSX yard marked the 3 churches. Where those circles overlapped just east of Murfreesboro Road sat an industrial district. 12 warehouses according to the map. Old buildings that had been there since the 70s. I had spent 40 years reading shipping manifests the way priests read scripture. I could identify a freight line by the pitch of its horn estimate cargo weight, from how a truck sat on its axles. These weren't just random skills, they were weapons I'd forgotten I possessed. I set my alarm for 5 a.m. The next morning, December 19th, I left the house before sunrise. Took a cab to the industrial district, had the driver drop me 3 blocks away. The key ring from the duffel bag felt heavy in my pocket. Warehouse number 7 sat at the end of a row of identical concrete buildings, each with rusted metal doors and small square windows too high to see through. A chain-link fence surrounded the complex, but the gate was unlocked. I walked up to the door of number 7, looked at the key in my hand, slid it into the lock. It turned smoothly. The door swung open on hinges that didn't squeak, recently oiled. Inside the warehouse was dim but not dark. Morning light filtered through those high windows, illuminating rows and rows of wooden crates and pallets. I flipped the light switch. Fluorescent tubes flickered to life overhead. "Dear God," I whispered. Hundreds of crates, cedar planks, copper pipes, electrical conduit, premium hardwood flooring, commercial-grade tile, all stacked neatly, all labeled with return shipping tags. Return to supplier, defective goods. I walked to the nearest stack, my hands shaking. Pulled a tag off a crate of cedar planks. "The cedar planks, kiln-dried grade A," I said aloud to the empty warehouse. "I ordered these myself 8 months ago. Brent said the supplier lost the shipment." Another crate. Copper pipe 3/4-inch commercial grade. The insurance paid out $38,000 for that loss alone. I said. I walked deeper into the warehouse, checking tags, reading labels. Every single item had been reported as lost, damaged, or returned to supplier. Every single item had generated an insurance claim. Every single item was here pristine and perfect, waiting to be sold on the black market. "And every single crate has a return label," I said quietly. "Defective goods. But there's nothing defective here. This is systematic theft from my own company." The estimated value had to exceed $380,000. I reached for the nearest crate and found what I'd been dreading, a delivery slip tucked under the metal banding. The signature at the bottom wasn't forged, wasn't faked, wasn't signed under duress. It was Brent's handwriting, the same loops and slants I'd seen on birthday cards and school permission forms for 42 years. I still remembered the afternoon I taught my 7-year-old son to sign his name, the careful way Brent's small hand had gripped the pen, forming each letter with determined concentration. He'd practiced for an hour, tongue between his teeth, until he could write Brent Caldwell in one smooth motion without lifting the pen. He'd been so proud. That same handwriting was on the delivery slip in my trembling hands. I stood in the cold warehouse fluorescent lights, humming overhead, staring at the signature line. The B with its distinctive loop. The way the T crossed slightly higher than it should. The downward slant of the D in Caldwell. 42 years of birthday cards, school permission forms, Christmas lists. I knew my son's handwriting better than my own. There was no question this was real. I walked to the back of the warehouse, legs unsteady, and found what I was looking for, a gray metal document box sitting on a workbench. It wasn't locked. Inside were manila folders, each labeled by month. I opened the first one. March 2023. 5 delivery slips, all bearing the same return label, defective goods, return to supplier. All signed by Brent Caldwell. March 14th. I said quietly to the empty warehouse. Cedar shipment, $16,000. That was the week he told me the supplier lost the order. I'd filed the insurance claim myself. Sat at the kitchen table with Brent, going over the paperwork, watching him shake his head with what I thought was genuine frustration. He'd put his hand on my shoulder and said, Sorry, Dad. These suppliers are getting unreliable. He'd put his hand on my shoulder while lying to my face. I opened the April folder. 7 slips. May folder. 9 slips. June, July, August, September, October, November. Each month had more than the last. May 22nd. I said, reading another slip. Copper pipe, 11,000. June 8th. Electrical conduit, 23,000. July 15th. Every single month. Every single lie. I laid the slips out on the workbench in chronological order. March through November. 8 months of systematic theft. The signatures were confident practiced, not the shaky hand of someone being coerced, not the rushed scrawl of someone desperate. This was my son's handwriting when he knew exactly what he was doing. I'd kept hoping driving here in the cab, walking through these warehouse doors, that I'd find evidence of manipulation. Forged signatures. Proof that Wade had pressured him. That Gail had controlled him. That my son was a victim of circumstances he couldn't escape. But these documents told a different story. The theft had started small in March. A single shipment, $16,000. Testing the system. Then it had grown. More shipments. Larger values. By November, they were moving over $50,000 a month. This wasn't desperation. This was a business plan. When does a father stop seeing his son as the child he raised and start seeing him as the man who chose to become a thief? I picked up the September folder and found something worse, a handwritten ledger in Brent's handwriting. Columns for date, item description, declared value, actual value, and profit margin. At the bottom of the page, a running total. Estimated gross profit, $380,000. Estimated net after expenses, $285,000. Split 3 ways, $95,000 each. He'd calculated it, tallied it, divided it with his partners like they were running a legitimate business. There was even a note in the margin, house sale target, $450,000. Combined with split equals $545,000. Belize visa requirement met. They were going to sell my house, the house I bought with Diane's insurance money, and use it to fund their escape to a country without extradition. I sat down heavily on a wooden crate, the ledger still in my hands. The warehouse was silent except for the distant rumble of a freight train passing on the CSX line. Diane had died 3 years ago last month. Leukemia. 6 months from diagnosis to the end. I'd sat by her hospital bed every single day, holding her hand, watching her fade. The night before she died, she'd squeezed my fingers and said, "Take care of Brent. He's going to need you." I'd promised her I would. 2 years later, I'd signed the house over to him. Trusted him with my life savings. Believed every word he said about estate planning and tax benefits and wanting to take care of his old dad. The worst part wasn't the theft. It was realizing that somewhere between teaching a 7-year-old to write his name and watching a 42-year-old forge insurance claims, I had lost the ability to recognize my own child. Or maybe I'd never really known him at all. I stood up slowly, my knees aching from the cold concrete floor, folded the March delivery slip, the first one, the proof that this had been Brent's choice from the beginning, and slipped it into my coat pocket alongside Howard's camera. The evidence would matter later. For police, for courts, for prosecutors who would need to prove intent and pattern and conspiracy. I'd spent 40 years building cases like this, tracking paper trails, following money. I knew what documentation would send all 3 of them to prison for a decade or more. But right now, that wasn't my priority. Right now, somewhere in this industrial maze, Howard Bentley was sitting in darkness, wondering if anyone was looking for him, wondering if anyone even knew he was missing. The video had said, "Tonight," which meant I had maybe 12 hours before they moved him to a permanent location, or worse. I looked around the warehouse one last time. Hundreds of crates, Hundreds of thousands of dollars in stolen goods. Evidence of my son's betrayal stacked floor to ceiling. Then I looked at the keys in my hand. Warehouse number 7. This was number 7. But the video audio had mentioned the old warehouse by the tracks. Old warehouse. Singular. Specific. There had to be another location. I walked to the warehouse entrance, pulled the door shut behind me, and locked it. The morning sun was just breaking over the industrial park, casting long shadows across the cracked pavement. I had known Howard Bentley for 20 years. We'd shared beers on summer evenings, complained about property taxes, talked about our late wives. He was a good man who'd been in the wrong place at the wrong time. I had known Brent for 42 years. And apparently, I hadn't known him at all. I knew which man deserved my loyalty now. "See, I will need this," I said quietly, patting the pocket with the delivery slip. "But first, I need to find my friend." The old warehouse door swung open on rusted hinges, revealing exactly what I had feared most: empty concrete floors, stretching into darkness, and no sign of Howard Bentley. I stood in the doorway, staring at nothing. The warehouse was maybe 50 feet deep, broken windows along the top walls, letting in weak sunlight. Debris scattered across the floor, old pallets, cardboard scraps, a rusted oil drum. But no Howard. I walked inside, slowly listening. The acoustics were hollow, echoing my footsteps. If someone were here, I'd hear breathing movement, something. Silence. I was about to leave when I noticed it, a dark stain on the concrete floor, still glistening in the pale light. I knelt down, touched it with my fingertips. Oil. I rubbed it between my fingers, held it up to the light. Reddish tint, specific viscosity. "Hydraulic fluid," I said quietly. "That's the leak from the Freightliner's rear axle seal. Our store had owned that truck for 12 years. It had developed a slow hydraulic leak 3 years ago. I told Brent to fix it 18 months ago when he'd taken over fleet maintenance. He'd said it wasn't worth the repair cost. Thank God for his laziness," I whispered. I stood up, looking more carefully. There, another drop 3 feet away toward the east wall, and another beyond that. The trail led to a loading door on the far side, still warm when I touched them. They'd moved Howard less than an hour ago. 40 years in construction materials had taught me that every material leaves a signature wood, grain, metal, shavings, hydraulic fluid. The conspirators thought they were covering their tracks. They had no idea they were painting a map in oil. I followed the trail out the loading door and into the industrial park. The oil drops were spaced about 10 feet apart, each one a small dark star on gray pavement. They led east away from the CSX line toward the residential blocks. I walked quickly, breath misting in the cold air. The trail turned left at an intersection, then right 2 blocks later. The drops were getting smaller but still visible if you knew what to look for. After 20 minutes, I reached a neighborhood I recognized. Eastern Nashville suburbs, older homes with detached garages. This was Wade's area. I'd been to his house once 3 years ago for a 4th of July barbecue. The oil trail turned into an alley behind a row of houses. I followed it to an old garage, its metal siding rusted and streaked with weather. The overhead door was closed, but there was a smaller door on the side. A new padlock hung from the latch, heavy-duty iron. I stood outside, listening. Nothing. But the oil stain beneath the overhead door was fresh and large, like a truck had been parked there recently. I knocked on the metal door. Not a regular knock, a specific pattern. 3 short taps, a pause, then 1 long knock. The code we'd used 20 years ago when Howard and I worked late-night deliveries together. A signal that meant friendly, not a threat. I waited. For 10 seconds, nothing. Then faint, barely audible, a weak tapping from inside. 3 short. Pause. 1 long. My breath caught. The last time I had knocked that pattern was the night before Diane's funeral, when Howard had stood guard at our warehouse so I could grieve in private. Some bonds don't need words, just 3 short knocks and 1 long. I pulled out the key ring from my pocket. 2 keys, one had opened warehouse number 7. The other was smaller iron, old-fashioned. I tried it on the padlock. It turned smoothly. The lock fell open. I pulled the door wide. Howard Bentley sat on the concrete floor in the dim garage, his back against the wall. He was thinner than I remembered, face gaunt and unshaven. His clothes were dirty, a faded bruise on his left cheek. But his eyes were clear and focused. Alive. Howard, I said, my voice breaking. He looked up at me and something like a smile crossed his face. Took you long enough. I stepped inside, kneeling beside him. Are you hurt? Can you walk? Dehydrated, exhausted, but alive. He gripped my arm with surprising strength. I knew you'd figure it out. I found your camera. In the bag they threw at me. I've been looking since yesterday. Howard's expression shifted, became urgent. Eugene, listen. I've been here 6 months. They moved me 3 times, but kept me close to the operation. They thought I was unconscious half the time, too weak to pay attention. Now you need water, medical attention. I need you to listen. He interrupted, his voice gaining strength. I heard everything, every single thing. I froze. Everything. The shipment routes, the buyers, the timeline. He paused, eyes locked on mine. The affair between your daughter-in-law and Wade. How long it's been going on. What they're really planning. My chest tightened. An affair. Started 2 years ago. This whole operation was Gail's idea. Wade's execution. Brent. Howard shook his head. Brent was the weak link they exploited. When is the final shipment? See, December 23rd. Night drop in Antioch. Buyer from Memphis. Cash on delivery. Howard's grip on my arm tightened. But Eugene, there's one more thing. Something they said about you that you need to hear before tonight. I helped him to his feet, steadying him against the garage wall. What did they say? Howard's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, but his eyes were sharp and clear. 3 nights ago, Wade asked Brent what they were going to do about you. About the house. Gail said you'd sign whatever they wanted because you were too old and too broken to fight back. He paused. But if you didn't sign, if you caused problems, Wade said he'd handle it the same way he handled me. Whatever Howard had heard during 6 months in captivity was about to change everything. I unscrewed the cap from the water bottle I'd bought from a vending machine outside the garage and pressed it into Howard's trembling hands. He took small, careful sips, throat working, like he'd forgotten how to swallow properly. Then he looked at me and spoke the first coherent sentence he'd managed in 6 months. December 23rd, Antioch warehouse, 9 p.m. I pulled a crate over and sat across from him. Tell me everything. They kept me close to the operation, moved me 3 times, but always within earshot. Howard took another sip. They thought I was unconscious most of the time, or too weak to matter. They talked like I wasn't there. What did you hear? The final shipment plan. They've rehearsed it a dozen times in the past 2 weeks. His voice was getting stronger with each word. Wade brings the truck loaded with the goods. Brent signs the buyer's transaction papers, some kind of ledger they need for their records. Gail takes the cash in a bag. Clean handoff, everyone has their role. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Not surprised, I'd already seen Brent's signatures on 8 months of delivery slips. But hearing it confirmed, hearing the coordination, the rehearsal, the division of labor. Brent signs the papers, I repeated. Every time they ran through it, that was his job. Wade said Brent had the best handwriting, the most legitimate-looking signature, like he was proud of it. I closed my eyes for a moment. Thought about teaching a 7-year-old boy to write his name carefully, neatly, with pride in each letter. Never imagining those same letters would one day sign away stolen goods. What else did you hear? Howard's expression shifted. 2 weeks before they grabbed me, I heard them through the warehouse wall. Gail and Wade, alone. Brent wasn't there. What were they saying? I couldn't make out most of it, but her voice was different, softer, intimate. He paused. I heard one phrase clear as day after he signs the papers. The implication hit me like a physical blow. Brent doesn't know about the affair, I said quietly. Howard shook his head. Your son thinks he's building a future with his wife. He has no idea she's planning a different future with his partner. 20 years of friendship had taught me that Howard didn't exaggerate and didn't guess. If Howard said he heard something, it happened exactly as he described it. That's why I had trusted him to manage the warehouse overnight shifts while everyone else went home. I stood up, helping Howard to his feet. We need to get you somewhere safe. Not a hospital. They'd file a police report, and the conspirators would know within hours. Somewhere they won't think to look. My cousin Linda, North Nashville. I haven't talked to her in 3 years, but she'd take me in. Perfect. I pulled out my phone and called a taxi. You stay there until the 24th. Don't call anyone. Don't go home. If they realize you're missing from this garage before I'm ready, they'll panic. Howard gripped my shoulder. What are you going to do? I'm going to let them think everything is going according to plan, I said. Right up until it isn't. The taxi arrived 15 minutes later. I helped Howard into the back seat, gave the driver Linda's address, and enough cash to cover the fare twice over. As we pulled away from the garage, Howard turned to me with something I hadn't seen in his face since I'd opened that door. Hope. Eugene, he said. Before they grabbed me, I sent you an email. I looked at him. When? The morning of June 12th. I'd been watching them for 2 weeks, documenting everything I saw. Late-night truckloads. License plates. I even got photos of delivery documents with Wade's name on them. He paused. I sent it all to that old address we used for warehouse inventory back in 2015. The one you stopped checking when you retired. My heart rate picked up. What was the subject line? Howard smiled weakly. In case I don't make it back. I pulled out my phone immediately. I'm checking it right now. Don't open it in the taxi, Howard said quickly. Get somewhere private, somewhere secure. What I sent you, it's detailed. Photos, dates, everything I witnessed before they grabbed me. You might think sending an email before disappearing for 6 months was paranoid. But Howard Bentley had worked construction logistics for 30 years. He knew that documentation was the difference between a conspiracy and a conviction. The taxi pulled up to a small house on a quiet street in North Nashville. Howard's cousin Linda answered the door with surprise that quickly turned to concern when she saw his condition. I watched from the sidewalk as Howard explained quietly, carefully, that he needed a place to stay for a few days and would explain everything later. She pulled him inside without hesitation. The door closed. Howard was safe. I stood there on the sidewalk, phone in my hand, and navigated to the old warehouse email account. The login screen appeared. I typed the password I hadn't used in over a year. The inbox loaded slowly. 17 unread messages filled the screen, mostly spam and automated notifications. But at the top, dated June 12th, 11 days before Howard vanished, sat a message that made my breath catch. From Howard Bentley. Subject: in case I don't make it back. My finger hovered over the screen, about to open evidence that could change everything. The email opened on my phone screen with a simple, devastating first line. Eugene, if you're reading this, I didn't make it home. I stood on the sidewalk outside Linda's house for another moment, then walked quickly to find somewhere private to read. 3 blocks away, I found a coffee shop, the kind with dark corners and quiet booths, where nobody paid attention to an old man staring at his phone. I ordered coffee I wouldn't drink and sat in the back corner. Then I read, March 8th, 2:17 a.m. Watched them load cedar planks onto Freightliner. License plate TN4729BX. Wade Mercer signed receiving documents. I got photos. He used his real name, Eugene. They're not even trying to hide it anymore. I scrolled down. 3 attached photos showed Wade standing beside our store's truck clipboard, in hand his signature clearly visible on the receiving slip. April 22nd, 1:45 a.m. copper pipe shipment. Same truck, same pattern. Brent was there this time directing the loading. Your son knows Eugene. I'm sorry. He's not being manipulated. He's running the operation. Another photo. Brent in the driver's seat of the Freightliner window down talking to Wade. The timestamp read 1:47 a.m. May 18th, 3:30 a.m. Third shipment I've witnessed. Electrical conduit boxes of fixtures, commercial-grade wire. They're moving product every 3 weeks like clockwork. I've documented everything. If something happens to me, you need to know this isn't random theft, it's systematic. I kept scrolling. The email was meticulously detailed. Dates, times, truck license plates, warehouse addresses. Every fact Howard could gather laid out like a logistics manifest. Then I reached the final entry. To June 12th, noon. Saw something that changes everything. Gail and Wade in the parking lot. Not discussing business. Photo attached. Eugene. I think they're planning something bigger than theft. I clicked the attachment. The photo loaded slowly. When it filled the screen, I understood exactly what Howard meant. Gail and Wade stood beside Wade's truck in our store's parking lot. Not close enough to be obviously inappropriate, but the body language was unmistakable. His hand on her lower back, her leaning into him. Both of them smiling like they were sharing a private joke. The timestamp on the photo read June 12th, 12:17 p.m., 2 weeks before Howard disappeared. Howard Bentley had been a warehouse manager for 30 years. He knew that in logistics, documentation wasn't paranoia, it was survival. Every shipment logged, every signature photographed, every discrepancy recorded. He'd applied that same methodical precision to documenting his own disappearance. I saved all the photos to my phone, forwarded the entire email to my personal account, created a backup, and sent it to a third address I'd set up years ago for tax documents. Then I left the coffee shop and took a taxi home. Brent's truck wasn't in the driveway when I arrived at 1:30 p.m. I let myself in quietly, walked to my small bedroom, and closed the door most of the way, leaving it cracked just enough to hear. At 2:15 p.m. I heard the front door open. Gail's voice followed by Wade's laugh. Hi, Brent said he'd be at the supplier meeting until 5, Gail said. The old man's taking a nap in the back room. Ah, good, Wade replied. We need to go over the final timeline. I lay on the bed perfectly still, listening. You booked the tickets like we discussed? Gail asked. Wade's voice was confident, relaxed. December 26th, 2 first-class seats to Belize. The account's already set up at Banco de Belize. Soon as we land, we transfer the funds and disappear. How much total? After the final shipment on the 23rd, we're looking at just over 500,000 combined. Split with your husband's share of the house sale, we're set for life, Gail laughed. It was a sound I'd heard 100 times at family dinners, but now it made my skin crawl. After he signs the papers on the 23rd, we're done with this place. Done with him. And the old man, Wade asked. A pause. Let Brent deal with his father. That's not our problem anymore. I heard her footsteps walking toward the kitchen. The refrigerator opened and closed. Water running. Then Wade's voice much quieter. Almost a whisper. He must have pulled out his phone. Yeah, it's me, he said softly. Change of plans. Cancel the second ticket. Just 1 seat in my name. December 26th. She doesn't need to know until I'm already gone. My breath caught. I forced myself to stay motionless, to keep breathing slowly. Wade was planning to betray Gail the same way they were both betraying Brent. Take all the money. Leave her behind. Disappear alone. You ever watch three people betray each other in three different directions and realize none of them know they're all being betrayed? That's what I was looking at, a perfect circle of deception, where every betrayer was also a victim. I heard Wade end the call. Heard Gail return from the kitchen. They talked for another 20 minutes about logistics and timing and which bank branch in Belize had the best exchange rates. Then Wade left. I waited until I heard Gail go upstairs. Waited until the water ran for her shower. Then I sat up, pulled a paper napkin from my pocket, one I'd grabbed from the coffee shop, and wrote 3 names in careful block letters. Brent, Gail, Wade. Under each name I wrote a single sentence. Under Brent, doesn't know about the affair or the 1 ticket. Under Gail, doesn't know about the 1 ticket. Under Wade, doesn't know I have everything. I folded the napkin carefully and slipped it into my shirt pocket. For the first time in 3 days, I smiled. Not with joy, but with the cold satisfaction of a man holding every card in a rigged game. I folded the napkin with 3 names and slipped it into my pocket. Then I heard Brent's truck pull out of the driveway. He and Wade were heading to some bar downtown, Gail had said earlier. The house would be quiet for hours. I moved to the dark corner of the living room, the spot behind the old armchair, where shadows pooled deepest. Sat down on the floor with my back against the wall. From here I could see into the kitchen through the doorway, but anyone in the kitchen would only see darkness. At 9 o'clock, Gail came downstairs. She moved around the kitchen, pulling out a pot, starting to cook something. Then she picked up her phone. I sat motionless in the dark corner, barely breathing as her whispered voice drifted toward me. "It's me," she said quietly. "No, he went with you to that bar. The old man's asleep in the back." A pause. She stirred whatever was on the stove. "I'm just saying, if the police come asking questions before we're out of the country, let Brent handle it. He's the one who signed every delivery slip, every ledger entry." My hand moved slowly to my coat pocket. Found the burner phone from the duffel bag. Pulled it out without a sound. Opened the voice memo app. Hit record. The phone made no sound, no light. Just a small red dot in the corner of the screen indicating it was capturing audio. "The house is in my name, but all the business documents have his signature." Gail continued, her voice low but clear. "If everything falls apart before the 26th, you need to let him take the fall. He signed all the papers. Police will go to him first." She laughed softly at something Wade said on the other end. I know we promised him we were in this together. But Wade, he's my husband, not my responsibility. Once we're in Belize, he can't touch us." I held the phone steady, making sure it caught every word. "Not the account number you gave me, 628491, that's confirmed with Banco de Belize." She paused. "Good. And the cash from the final shipment goes straight into that account the day we land. No trail back to Tennessee." Another pause, longer this time. "Well, yes, I'm sure. After the 23rd, once the shipment is done and Brent signs the house papers on the 26th, we disappear. Let him deal with the aftermath. He wanted to be the big man running the operation. Let him face the consequences like a big man." She ended the call, set the phone on the counter, went back to stirring her pot, humming softly, like she'd just had a pleasant conversation about vacation plans. I stopped the recording. 4 minutes and 37 seconds of Gail Caldwell confessing to conspiracy fraud and planning to frame her own husband for crimes they'd committed together. Tennessee is a one-party consent state. That means if you're part of a conversation, even if you're just sitting in the same room listening, you can legally record it without telling the other person. I wasn't eavesdropping. I was documenting a confession in my own home. I waited until Gail went upstairs at 10:30 p.m. Waited until I heard the shower running. Then I slipped back to my small bedroom, closed the door, and lay on the narrow bed, staring at the ceiling. My son stole from me and planned to sell my house. His wife was stealing his future and planning to frame him for everything. His partner was stealing from both of them and planning to abandon them with nothing. It was a perfect circle of greed eating itself. The painful irony wasn't lost on me. Brent had betrayed his father, and now he was being betrayed by the people he'd chosen to trust instead. He'd signed away his integrity for money that would never reach his hands for a woman who saw him as disposable, for a future that had already been stolen by someone else. I could warn him. I could walk into the living room tomorrow morning, sit him down and tell him everything. About the affair. About Wade's one ticket. About Gail's plan to let him take the fall while she disappeared to Belize. Would he believe me? Or would he think it was a desperate old man trying to divide them, trying to salvage some relationship with a son who'd already made his choice? What do you owe a son who chose to destroy you? What do you owe a son who's about to be destroyed the same way? The answer I realized was the same either way: the truth, and nothing but the truth. But the truth didn't mean warning him. It meant letting him face it. Brent had made his choices. He'd signed those papers knowing they were fraudulent. He'd looked me in the eye and lied about supplier losses, insurance claims, missing shipments. He'd stood silent while his wife threw me into the December snow. He deserved to see exactly who he'd trusted and what they planned to do to him. Not because I wanted revenge, because some lessons can only be learned through consequences. Because the kindest thing I could do for my son now was let him face the truth with his own eyes, not hear it from a father he'd already decided didn't matter. I would give him the truth, but I would give it to him the way Howard had given it to me, through evidence, through documentation, through the cold, hard reality of what his partners were planning. At the warehouse, on December 23rd, when all three conspirators stood together with stolen goods and cash and signed papers, when the truth would be undeniable. I closed my eyes in the darkness of my small bedroom, one hand resting on the burner phone containing Gail's recorded confession. Tomorrow I would go to the police, not to turn in my son alone, but to trap all three conspirators at once. Howard was safe. The evidence was gathered. The December 23rd deadline was 4 days away. I had been a victim for 3 days. Starting tomorrow morning, I would become the hunter. The private investigator's nameplate read, "Malcolm Greer, licensed P.I., and I slid the paper across the desk with 2 simple requests. Verify 1 plane ticket to Belize and confirm 1 offshore bank account, both belonging to the man planning to destroy my family. I'd left the house that morning under the pretense of a doctor's appointment. Brent had barely looked up from his phone when I'd mentioned it. Good. The less attention I drew, the better. Malcolm Greer was a licensed private investigator with 15 years tracking financial paper trails for Nashville divorce attorneys. He didn't ask why I needed the information. He just looked at the names I'd written down and nodded. "Still, Wade Mercer," I said. "I need confirmation he booked a plane ticket to Belize for December 26th, and I need to know if it's 1 ticket or 2. His business partner thinks it's 2. Greer pulled his keyboard closer, fingers already typing. "Airline manifests are public information with the right access. Give me 4 hours. I also need verification of an offshore account at Banco de Belize. Account number 628491. Greer made a note. "That'll take longer. Banks don't share details, but I can confirm whether the account exists and who owns it. Anything else? How much?" "500 for the ticket verification. Another 300 for the bank work. Cash or check." I handed him $800 bills from the envelope I'd withdrawn that morning. "Call me when you have something." 4 hours later, I sat across from him again. He slid a printout across the desk. "1 ticket," Greer said. "First class to Belize City, December 26th, 8:45 a.m. departure. Booked September 18th of this year. Paid in full, non-refundable. Passenger name Wade Mercer. No second ticket exists under his name or any connected payment method. I stared at the date. September 18th. It's September 18th, I said slowly. That's 3 weeks before my son signed the store transfer papers. Wade planned his escape before the conspiracy even started. Looks that way, Greer said. The bank account exists and is active but currently empty. Established September 20th, 2 days after the ticket booking. Both under Wade Mercer's name exclusively. 3 months. Wade Mercer had been planning his escape for 3 months longer than most people plan a wedding. He'd booked the ticket before Brent even owned the company, before the first shipment was stolen, before Gail knew she was being used. That's not opportunism. That's strategy. I thanked Greer, took the printouts, and drove directly to Davidson County Precinct. Detective Vernon Hayes was a 48-year-old veteran of Nashville's Financial Crimes Division. I'd asked for him specifically at the front desk, told them I had evidence of ongoing commercial theft, and needed someone who understood paper trails. He met me in a small conference room, listened carefully as I laid out the preliminary evidence. I showed him Howard's camera, played the 47-second video of 3 people loading goods onto a truck in the middle of the night. Played the audio of Gail's voice saying, "Take the old neighbor to the old warehouse." This is Howard Bentley's camera, I explained. He's been missing 6 months. They kidnapped him because he witnessed the thefts. Hayes took notes. Where is Mr. Bentley now? Safe. Hidden. I found him 2 days ago. I showed him Howard's email with the documented dates and photos. Showed him the printout from Greer proving Wade's one-ticket deception. Played him the recording of Gail's phone call planning to frame Brent. Hayes examined the camera carefully, listened to every recording twice. This video shows 3 people moving goods at night. Your neighbor's testimony establishes kidnapping. The phone recording proves conspiracy. It's solid, Mr. Caldwell, but it's not enough for arrests, not yet. Why not? Because we need them caught in the act with the physical merchandise. What you've given me opens an investigation. It's enough for warrants for surveillance, but for arrests that stick, we need them red-handed. I leaned forward. What do you need from me? You said they're planning a final shipment December 23rd. You give us the exact location and time of that shipment. We deploy unmarked surveillance units. When they show up with stolen goods and exchange them for cash, we move in. Clean, legal, ironclad. You can't arrest them before that. We could, but a good lawyer would argue circumstantial evidence claim the videos are ambiguous, that the recordings are hearsay. If we catch them in the act with the merchandise, with the buyer, with the money changing hands, there's no defense. It's grand larceny, conspiracy, and kidnapping all at once. Working with the police wasn't surrender. It was the difference between throwing a punch and building a cage. I had spent 3 days gathering evidence. Now I was handing the blueprints to people with badges and arrest warrants. What if they changed the location? I asked. Then you need to get us the new address before the 23rd. Without exact coordinates, we can't position units. This only works if we know exactly where they'll be. Street address, warehouse number, exact time. I nodded slowly. And my role? You stay out of the way. You've done the hard part, gathering evidence, keeping yourself safe. Let us handle the takedown. This is police work now. Hayes leaned forward, pen poised over his notepad. Give us the address and the time. We'll handle the rest. I nodded slowly, then hesitated. There's one thing I haven't told you yet, Detective. Howard said the shipment was going to an Antioch warehouse, but that was information from 6 months ago. They may have changed the location since then. I paused. Right now, I don't have the exact current address. Hayes's pen stopped mid-air. The coordinated trap depended on one thing I didn't possess, knowing exactly where my son would be on December 23rd. The dinner table felt twice as large with only two place settings, me at one end, Brent at the other, and Gail's empty chair between us like a silent witness to everything unspoken. I'd come home from the police precinct around 6 p.m., the weight of Detective Hayes's final words still heavy in my chest. I needed that address. Without it, the entire trap collapsed. Gail had announced at 5:30 that she was having dinner with friends. I'd watched her leave in her best-dressed perfume trailing behind her. Friends. Right. More likely, she was meeting Wade at some restaurant where they could plan their Belize escape while my son sat home oblivious. Brent had suggested we order Chinese food. I'd agreed. Now we sat across from each other with white takeout containers between us, the silence thick enough to cut. He picked at his lo mein with chopsticks, not eating, just moving the noodles around. I ate slowly, mechanically, tasting nothing. The kitchen clock ticked loudly. Outside, a car drove past. 5 minutes passed. 10. Brent set down his chopsticks. Picked them up again. Set them down. "Dad," he said finally. I looked up. "Yes." He didn't meet my eyes. "That bag. The one Gail threw at you on Monday morning. Did you—" He stopped. Started again. "Did you open it?" My hand remained steady on my fork. "Eventually. Why? Was your stuff inside your coat and everything?" I watched him carefully. His jaw was tight, his knuckles white where they gripped the edge of the table. This wasn't casual curiosity. This was panic poorly disguised as concern. "Why do you ask?" I said quietly. Brent shifted in his chair. "No reason. Gail grabbed it from the office closet in a rush that morning. I wanted to make sure it was the right bag. That you got your things. How do you lie to the child you raised? The same way you breathe when your lungs are full of grief, carefully, deliberately, and without letting anyone see the effort it takes." "It took me 10 minutes to get the zipper unstuck," I said, meeting his eyes directly. "Arthritis makes everything harder these days. But yes, Brent, I opened it. And just an old coat and some shoes like I thought. Nothing important." I watched the lie land. Watched my son's shoulders drop slightly, the tension easing just a fraction. He exhaled slowly, picked up his chopsticks again. "Good," he said. "That's good. I was worried." He stopped himself. "Worried about what?" "Nothing. Just that you were out in the cold without a coat that morning. It was wrong of us to—" He trailed off again, not finishing the sentence, not apologizing, just acknowledging without accepting responsibility. "Before I tell you what I said next, to my son, are you still with me?" Comment A, if you think I should have told Brent the truth right there. Or B, if I should keep lying and add one reason why in 5 to 10 words. Quick note, what follows includes some fictionalized dialogue to show the emotional weight of this moment. If that's not for you, feel free to stop here. "It's fine," I said quietly. I found a coffee shop, warmed up, called a cab home. Brent nodded, but he was still watching me, still searching my face for something. A tell. A crack in the story. Some sign that I knew more than I was saying. "Where did you go after that?" he asked. "When you left on Monday. You were gone most of the day." "Doctor's appointment Tuesday morning, just routine checkup. Then I stopped at the library, read the newspaper, came home." Another lie. Smooth as the first. "You feeling okay, health-wise?" "For a 70-year-old man, I'm doing fine." Brent picked up a spring roll, set it down without taking a bite. "Dad, I know things have been tense between us, between you and Gail. I just want you to know that after the new year, things are going to get better." We're going to figure out the living situation, get you set up somewhere comfortable. Somewhere comfortable. Code for somewhere that isn't this house. Somewhere far away where I wouldn't interfere with their plans. I appreciate that, I said. He finally took a bite of his spring roll. Chewed slowly. Swallowed. You'd tell me if something was wrong, right? If you needed help with something. I looked at my son across the table. At the face I'd watched grow from infant to man. At the eyes that looked so much like Diane's. At the person who'd chosen to destroy me for money. Of course, I said. You're my son, I'd tell you. The biggest lie of all. Brent seemed to accept this. He returned to his dinner, the worst of his anxiety passing. He still suspected something was wrong. I could see it in the way his eyes occasionally flicked to me, the way his jaw stayed tight. But he trusted his father too much to imagine the truth. That the pathetic old man sitting across from him had found everything. That I'd rescued Howard. That I had evidence of 8 months of systematic theft. That I knew about the affair, the one ticket, the plan to frame him. That in 3 days, I would watch him realize he'd been betrayed by the two people he trusted most. I looked at his hand resting on the table, the same hand I'd held crossing streets when Brent was 5, the same hand I'd steadied when teaching him to hammer nails at 12, the same hand that had signed theft documents for 8 months straight. After December 23rd, that hand would wear handcuffs. But right now, in this moment, he was still my son. Still the boy who'd cried when his goldfish died. Still the teenager who'd called me from college just to hear my voice. Still the man who thought he was building a future, not digging his own grave. He didn't know about Gail and Wade's affair. Didn't know about the one ticket. Didn't know that his wife was planning to let him take the legal fall while she disappeared with another man. He was a victim, but he was also a thief. Both things could be true. I watched my son eat in silence, knowing that in 3 days at a warehouse somewhere in Nashville, Brent would finally understand what I had known all along, that the people he trusted most had been planning his destruction from the very beginning. The next morning, I woke early and moved quietly through the house. Brent's bedroom door was cracked open. He was on the phone, voice low but audible. I froze in the hallway outside his room, hand halfway to the doorknob, as his voice drifted through. No, not Antioch anymore. Wade says the location's changed. I pulled my hand back, stepped closer to the wall where the shadows were deepest. Listened. Wade, I understand. Security reasons. But you're sure the Smyrna location is secure? Brent paused, listening to whatever Wade was saying. The old Winston place off Nissan Drive. Yeah, I know where that is. My chest tightened. Smyrna, not Antioch. 20 miles southeast of where Howard had said the operation was running 6 months ago. Howard's information was outdated. The address I'd promised Detective Hayes didn't exist, not as the actual location anyway. Okay, Brent said. December 23rd, 9 p.m., same plan. I'll be there. I heard him end the call. Heard the bed creak as he stood up. I moved quickly down the hallway, slipping into the bathroom and closing the door just as Brent's bedroom door opened fully. I stood there in the dark bathroom, gripping the sink, my mind racing. Smyrna. The Winston place. Nissan Drive. They'd changed the location. 6 months was a long time in a criminal operation. Of course they'd moved things around. Of course they'd changed venues for security. Detective Hayes needed this new address, or the entire trap collapsed. But I couldn't just call him with information I'd overheard through a bedroom door. I needed verification. Confirmation that this address was real, that it made sense, that I wasn't walking the police into a dead end. Every plan has a moment where it threatens to collapse. The question isn't whether obstacles appear, it's whether you adapt faster than your enemies can adjust. I had spent 40 years in logistics. Rerouting was second nature. I waited until Brent left the house at 9 a.m. Then I got in my car and drove to North Nashville. Howard answered the door at his cousin Linda's house looking stronger than he had 2 days ago. Color had returned to his face. His hands didn't shake as much. "Eugene," he said, stepping aside to let me in. "Everything okay?" I pulled out the piece of paper where I'd written the address while sitting in my car. "They changed the location. Not Antioch anymore. Smyrna. Does this address mean anything to you?" I handed him the paper, Winston Contracting 1847 Nissan Drive, Smyrna. Howard stared at it for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "Winston Contracting," he said. "I know that place. Wade worked for Old Man Winston 10 years back before the company went bankrupt. Wade must still have keys to the property." "Oh, you're sure?" "I delivered materials there dozens of times when Winston was still operating. It's an old industrial site been abandoned since 2019. Perfect location for moving stolen goods, no neighbors, no security cameras loading dock in the back." I pulled out my phone and called Detective Hayes. He answered on the second ring. "Mr. Caldwell." "New location confirmed," I said. "Not Antioch, Smyrna. 1847 Nissan Drive. Winston Contracting. My source recognizes it. Wade has a prior connection to the property." I heard typing on the other end. "Hold on. We're verifying now." 30 seconds passed. Hayes came back on the line. "Address confirmed. Abandoned industrial site foreclosed in 2020, currently owned by the bank. No active security. Easy access from 2 roads." He paused. "This is good, Mr. Caldwell. Better than Antioch, actually. More isolated. We can set up surveillance without being spotted. December 23rd, you said 9 p.m. Or we'll have units in position by 8 p.m. Unmarked vehicles, plain clothes. When they show up with the merchandise, we move in. What do you need from me? Stay out of the way. Let us handle it. You've done your part." I ended the call and looked at Howard. He was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "They're setting up surveillance," I said. "December 23rd. It's happening." Howard nodded slowly. Then he said something I didn't expect. "I want to be there." I stared at him. "What? December 23rd. When the police move in. I want to be there." His voice was steady, clear. "I want to see their faces when it all falls down, when they realize the old neighbor they locked in a garage for 6 months is the one who brought the law to their door." "Howard, that's not safe. The police said—" "I don't care what the police said." He stepped closer. "Eugene, I spent 6 months in darkness. 6 months listening to 3 criminals plan their escape while I wondered if anyone would find me before they killed me. I'm not hiding anymore. I want to stand there and watch justice happen." Howard Bentley had spent 6 months in captivity, listening to conspirators plan their crimes, while he wondered if anyone would find him before they killed him. Now he had a choice: hide in safety or stand up and watch justice delivered in person. For Howard, that wasn't a choice at all. I looked at my friend, the man who'd lived next door for 20 years, who'd stood guard at the warehouse the night before Diane's funeral, who'd risked his life to document crimes he'd witnessed. "You're sure about this?" I asked. Howard gripped my hand with surprising strength for a man who'd been captive for half a year. "I want to see their faces when it all falls down," he repeated. "When Brent realizes his wife betrayed him. When Gail realizes Wade abandoned her. When Wade realizes an old man outsmarted him." I looked at my friend and promised the one thing I knew I could deliver. "You will," I said. December 23rd, 9 p.m. We'll both be there. 2 old men, 70 and 65, preparing to bring down 3 conspirators who'd made the fatal mistake of underestimating age for weakness. The hardest part of betrayal isn't the act itself, it's the waiting, the knowing. Sitting across from someone who trusts you completely while carrying the weight of what you're about to destroy. I left Howard's safe house with our pact made. The next day, December 22nd, I sat in my small bedroom with the burner phone from the duffel bag and Wade Mercer's cell number written on a piece of paper. 2 o'clock. Gail was shopping. Brent was at the store. The house was quiet. My hands shook so hard I had to set the phone down twice before dialing. I counted to 10. Breathed. Picked it up again. The plastic felt cheap, foreign. Not like my phone. Like something criminals use. I was a criminal now, at least Wade would think so. A snitch. A traitor. I dialed. 3 rings. Then Wade's voice. "Yeah!" "Sup, Mr. Mercer. This is Rick calling on behalf of the Memphis buyer. We spoke last week about the hardwood shipment." A pause. "Rick." "Right. What's up?" "Location change for tomorrow night's pickup. Security reasons. My client's concerned about the Smyrna site too exposed after that warehouse fire brought county inspectors through the area." "Where's the new location?" "Berry Hill, 437 Craighead Street. Old industrial complex, better loading dock access. Enclosed bay, no visibility from the street. 437 Craighead." Wade repeated. I heard him writing it down. "That's pretty central. You sure it's secure? My clients used it for 3 previous transactions. No issues. Better than Smyrna." Wade was quiet for a moment. I expected questions. Pushback. A demand to verify with the buyer directly. Instead, same time, 9 p.m. 9 p.m. Same inventory, 2,400 square feet. Premium hardwood, 9 pallets, porcelain tile. Cash on delivery. "Got it. 437 Craighead, Berry Hill, 9 p.m. tomorrow? We'll be there." He hung up. I sat there staring at the phone. He'd accepted without hesitation. No verification call. No suspicion. Just routine confirmation, like he'd done this 100 times before. Which I realized with a sick feeling he probably had. This wasn't Wade's first operation. That evening, Gail left for her book club in her best-dressed perfume trailing behind her. Probably meeting Wade to finalize their escape. Brent and I sat in the living room. He had a beer, I had coffee. The TV played quietly some basketball game neither of us watched. The Christmas tree stood in the corner, still bare. "Dad," Brent said suddenly. I looked at him. "Yes. I know things have been rough. With the house, with money." He took a sip of beer. "But you don't need to worry anymore. After the 26th, everything will be fine. We're going to get you set up somewhere comfortable." He believed it. I could see it in his face. My son genuinely believed the money from this operation would solve our problems. That he was helping me. He had no idea that on the 26th, Gail and Wade would be boarding a plane to Belize. That she'd planned to frame him. That Wade had booked only 1 ticket. My throat tightened. "That's kind of you. You're my dad. Of course I think about it." He set down his beer. "I know I haven't always been there for you the way I should have been, especially after Mom died. But I'm trying to do better now." I remembered Brent at 8 years old crying because he'd accidentally broken Howard's window with a baseball. I'd knelt beside him and said, "You tell the truth. You face what you did. That's what men do." Now, decades later, I wondered if Brent remembered that lesson. Or if somewhere along the way my son had learned a different one. "I appreciate that," I said quietly. We sat in silence for another hour. Then Brent went to bed. I stayed on the couch, staring at that bare tree, knowing this was the last night before everything changed. The next morning, December 23rd. I met Detective Hayes at Frothy Monkey Coffee Shop downtown. I slid the evidence across the table. Howard's camera, the burner phone with Gail's recorded confession, the USB drive with Howard's email and photos, the delivery slips with Brent's signatures. "This is everything," I said. Hayes examined each piece carefully. Surveillance units deploy at 8 p.m. We'll have eyes on the warehouse before they arrive. When they show up with the merchandise and make the exchange, we move in. And Howard and I, you arrive at 9 p.m. Civilian observation, only you identify the subjects, provide confirmation. Once we have visual on the goods, we execute arrests. He paused. You understand you can't participate in the takedown. I understand. But detective, before you arrest them, I need to say something to my son. Just a few words. Hayes looked at me for a long moment. You've earned that right, Mr. Caldwell. We'll give you 60 seconds before we move in. I walked out into the cold December morning feeling hollow. That night, I came home to find Gail sitting on the couch crying. The Christmas tree stood half-decorated, ornaments scattered on the floor, lights, tangled tinsel draped over a few branches before she'd given up. What's wrong? I asked. She wiped her eyes. I don't know. I just have this terrible feeling something bad is about to happen. Like everything's about to fall apart. I couldn't tell her she was right. Couldn't tell her that tomorrow night the man she was planning to run away with would abandon her. That the conspiracy she'd orchestrated would collapse. It's just the holidays, I said. They're always stressful. She nodded and went upstairs to bed. I stood in the living room, staring at the half-decorated Christmas tree. Ornaments lay scattered on the floor like abandoned hopes. The tree lights blinked slowly, illuminating nothing. I wondered if, after all this, anyone would want to decorate it again. The waiting was over. Headlights swept across the warehouse loading dock at exactly 8:32 p.m. I sat in the passenger seat of Detective Hayes's unmarked sedan, parked 200 meters from the Berry Hill warehouse on Craighead Street. The engine was off. December cold seeped through the windows, through my coat, into my bones. The half-decorated Christmas tree was still standing in my living room. Gail had gone to bed last night, not knowing she'd never finish it. I'd left the house at 7:45 p.m., told no one where I was going, and met Hayes at this position at 8:15. Howard was in a second surveillance vehicle 50 meters behind us, watching through his own set of binoculars. He'd insisted on being here. I understood why. Hayes lifted his radio. Unit 2, confirm position, a voice crackled back. 2 blocks south, standing by. Unit 3, 2 blocks north. We have visual on your location. Hayes set down the radio and looked at me. Backups in position. 2 units, 8 officers. They won't get away. My hands were shaking. I gripped my knees to stop them. That's my son in there, I said quietly. His wife? Hayes was quiet for a moment. Then, I know. You can still walk away from this, Mr. Caldwell. We have enough evidence. You don't have to watch. I shook my head. I need to see it. I need him to see me. The headlights swept across the loading dock again, and a white Ford F250 pulled into the warehouse lot. Brent was driving. I recognized his profile through the windshield even from this distance. Wade sat in the passenger seat, and in the back Gail. All 3 of them. Hayes lifted binoculars. That's all 3. That's all 3, I said. The truck stopped near the warehouse entrance. 3 doors opened. Brent climbed out first, keys in hand, looking relaxed, confident, like a man executing a well-rehearsed plan. Wade exited next, stretching his arms over his head. He said something to Brent that made my son laugh. Then Gail stepped out of the back seat. She was wearing dark clothes, jeans, a black jacket I'd never seen before. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail. She looked professional, prepared, not nervous, not scared. She looked like someone who'd done this before. Brent walked to the warehouse bay door and unlocked it with a key. The metal door rolled up with a grinding sound I could hear even from 200 meters away. Yellow sodium lights inside flickered to life. Wade climbed back into the truck and backed it carefully into the loading dock. Brent guided him in with hand signals. Gail stood to the side phone already in her hand. My breath fogged the binoculars. I wiped the lenses, my hands numb from cold and adrenaline. The vinyl seat creaked as I shifted position. Hayes remained perfectly still beside me, his own binoculars trained on the warehouse. A distant CSX train horn echoed through Berry Hill, lonely, mournful. Brent and Wade opened the truck bed and began checking the inventory. I could see pallets of hardwood under the harsh lights, stacks of porcelain tile, coils of copper wire, hundreds of thousands of dollars in stolen construction materials, all bearing the labels of my company. Wade pulled out a clipboard. Brent pointed to different pallets, counting. They moved with practiced efficiency. Gail stayed away from the truck. She paced near the warehouse entrance, phone pressed to her ear. Yes, 437 Craighead. I heard her say faintly through Hayes's directional microphone. Bay 3. We're ready when you are. She wasn't reluctant. She wasn't being coerced or manipulated. She was the coordinator. Calm, professional. Orchestrating the buyer's arrival like a logistics manager handling a legitimate delivery. Hayes glanced at me. She's running point. I nodded, unable to speak. Wade walked over to Brent with the clipboard. 9 pallets, tile 2,400 square feet oak. Perfect. Brent grinned. Told you this would work. I remembered Gail laughing in our kitchen 2 Christmases ago, flour on her nose from baking cookies. She'd been making Brent's favorites, chocolate chip with walnuts. We'd all sat around the table that night, eating warm cookies and drinking milk, talking about nothing important. Now she stood under yellow warehouse lights, holding a phone, coordinating the sale of stolen goods. When did she become this person? Or had she always been, and I'd simply refused to see? Gail ended her call and walked toward the truck. Wade looked up as she approached. Their eyes met. He smiled. Just a brief smile. Nothing obvious. Nothing that Brent would notice from where he stood checking pallets on the far side of the truck. But Gail returned it. The same small smile. The same unspoken understanding. It lasted maybe 2 seconds. But in those 2 seconds I saw everything. The intimacy. The conspiracy. The relationship that went far beyond business partnership. They'd been planning this together from the beginning. Not just the theft. Not just the escape to Belize. But the betrayal of Brent specifically. Using him. Setting him up to take the fall. And my son had no idea. Did you see that? Hayes asked quietly. I lowered the binoculars. I saw it. Hayes lifted his radio to his mouth finger on the transmit button. I checked my watch, 8:47 p.m. 13 minutes until 9 o'clock, when Howard and I were supposed to arrive. When the buyer would show. When everything would fall apart. Hayes whispered into the radio. Targets in sight. All 3 present. Stand by. I checked my watch again. 8:47 p.m. 13 minutes left. 13 minutes became 18. At 9:05 p.m. a silver Toyota Tacoma pulled into the warehouse lot. The buyer had arrived. From the surveillance car, I watched through binoculars as an undercover officer stepped out, Rick Thornton, posing as a construction contractor from Memphis. He wore flannel work boots and carried himself like someone who'd been buying materials for 20 years. He walked into the warehouse like he belonged there. Hayes handed me an earpiece. Audio feed. You'll hear everything. I pressed it into my ear just as Wade's hand closed around the duffel bag handles before the buyer had even let go. 47 even. The undercover officer said, his voice crackling through the feed. Pleasure doing business. Wade pulled the bag away from him. Likewise, I heard the zipper open, heard Wade's sharp intake of breath as he looked at the cash. $47,000 in bills, all counted and bundled. The undercover officer didn't linger. I'll be in touch for the next shipment. he said, then turned and walked out. The warehouse door clanged shut. Through the binoculars, I saw the officer climb back into his truck and drive away, leaving 3 conspirators alone under harsh yellow lights. Gail stepped forward, hand extended. Wade, hand it here. We split it like we agreed. Wade stepped back, gripping the duffel bag tighter. No. Gail's hand froze in midair. What? I said no. Wade's voice was cold, flat. Go back to your husband. I'm leaving alone. The silence that followed lasted maybe 3 seconds. Then Gail's voice erupted, shrill and furious. You son of a bitch, we had a deal. Brent's voice cut through from the other side of the warehouse. What the hell is he talking about, Gail? I adjusted the binoculars. Brent stood 5 meters away, hands still on a pallet he'd been securing. He was staring at his wife, then at Wade, then back at his wife. Gail spun toward him. Brent, it's not… go back to your husband. Brent repeated, his voice rising. What does he mean, go back to your husband? Wade laughed. Actually laughed. You really didn't tell him all these months, and you never told him. Shut up, Gail hissed. Tell me what… Brent walked toward them, fists clenched. Gail, what is he talking about? Gail's voice echoed off the concrete walls, shrill and desperate. The sodium lights buzzed overhead. Wade's breath came fast, his knuckles white on the duffel handles. Brent's boots scraped across the floor as he stepped closer, fists clenched. Fine, Gail snapped. You want the truth? Wade and I have been planning this for over a year. We needed someone with access to your father's inventory, someone who could sign the papers. That was you, Brent. That's all you ever were, access. Brent stopped walking. You're lying. I'm not lying. I've been planning this since October of last year. You think I didn't know exactly what we were doing. You think I was the naive wife going along with her husband's scheme. Gail's voice was venomous now. You were the mark, Brent. You were always the mark. I forged Dad's signature on those transfer forms for you, Brent shouted. And I'm grateful, Wade said, smirking. Those signatures made everything legal enough to pass initial inspection. Classic misdirection. Brent turned to Wade. You stole from my father's inventory. You promised me equal shares. Where's my cut? Wade held up the duffel bag. $47,000 for goods worth twice that, and you want half. You're even dumber than I thought. The goods were worth $93,000, Brent yelled. I priced them myself in March 14th to be exact, Gail said coldly. The cedar shipment, $16,000 reported as lost. I filed the insurance claim while you signed the false inventory report. 200 meters away, listening through the earpiece, I closed my eyes. My wife, my son, my son's best friend. All 3 tearing each other apart, confessing to crimes they thought no one else could hear. Brent was shouting dates now. April 22nd, copper pipe 11,000. May 18th, electrical conduit. June 8th. Every single month you had me sign fraudulent reports. You knew they were fraudulent, Gail screamed. Don't pretend you were innocent. You forged your father's signature. You created false shipping manifests. You knew exactly what you were doing. For U.S., Brent shouted back. For our future. You said we'd use the money to start over to get away from Dad's failing business. I said that to keep you signing papers, Gail said. Wade and I were leaving on December 26th. Without you. Wade shook his head. Not we. Me. I booked 1 ticket, Gail. Just 1. Gail's face went white. What? September 18th. First class to Belize. December 26th, departure. Passenger name Wade Mercer. He hefted the duffel bag. I'm taking this money, getting on that plane, and neither of you will ever see me again. Gail lunged at him. Brent grabbed her arm, yanking her back. She spun and slapped him across the face. Brent shoved her. Wade dropped the duffel bag and grabbed Brent's collar, all three of them screaming now, shouting over each other, confessing dates, amounts, methods. Every detail of an 8-month conspiracy recorded by hidden police cameras they didn't know existed. In my ear, Detective Hayes's voice cut through calm and final. That's enough. Send him in. I pulled the earpiece out and looked at Hayes. He nodded. I opened the car door. Howard stepped out of the second surveillance vehicle 50 meters behind us, walking toward me. His face was set, determined. Ready, Hon? I asked. Howard nodded. Let's go. Time to face them. Howard and I walked toward the warehouse. 50 meters, 40, 30. Then the warehouse door exploded inward with a crash of metal and shouted commands. Police hands up, don't move. Officers poured through the entrance, weapons drawn, voices overlapping. 6 of them vests marked police in white letters, filling the warehouse with authority and flashing lights. Through the open door, I saw Brent's hands shoot into the air. Saw Gail freeze her face, going white. Saw Wade drop the duffel bag and step back, palms out. On your knees, all 3 of you come. They knelt. Brent first, then Gail, then Wade. Hands behind their heads. The practiced choreography of people who knew they were caught. And that's when Howard and I walked through the loading dock entrance on the opposite side of the warehouse. The loading dock door was already open. Detective Hayes had arranged it. We walked in calmly, 2 old men in winter coats, our footsteps echoing on the concrete floor. Brent saw us first. His eyes went wide. Dad, he was looking at Howard. At the man they'd locked in a garage for 6 months. At the neighbor they'd thought was gone, neutralized, no longer a threat. Howard walked past them without a word, his face set and hard. I stopped in front of Detective Hayes and placed 2 items on the evidence table. He'd set up Howard's camera and the burner phone that had been in the duffel bag. Everything's on the camera, I said quietly. Everything. Hayes nodded. We got the warehouse confession too. Audio and video, all 3 of them. Gail's voice cut through sharp and panicked. Eugene, what is this? I didn't answer her, didn't look at her. Wade was staring at Howard like he'd seen a ghost. You're supposed to be dead, Howard finished. Sorry to disappoint. An officer stepped forward with handcuffs. Brent Caldwell, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. The words continued mechanical and practiced. I'd heard them on television 100 times. Never thought I'd hear them spoken to my son. They cuffed all 3. Brent first, then Gail, then Wade. Led them out of the warehouse into the parking lot, where 2 patrol cars waited, lights flashing red and blue against the December night. Gail didn't look at me as they walked her past. Her head was down, shoulders hunched. She was already trying to disappear. Wade stared straight ahead, jaw tight, calculating his legal defense before he'd even reached the car. Only Brent turned back. At the warehouse door, with an officer's hand on his shoulder, he stopped and looked at me. Searched my face for something, forgiveness maybe, or just understanding. He wouldn't find either. When did you know Dad? He asked. Not, I'm sorry. Not, please forgive me. Just that one question. When did you know? I met his eyes for a long moment. Saw the boy who'd cried over a broken window. Saw the teenager who'd called me from college just to hear my voice. Saw the man who'd signed 8 months of fraudulent documents and planned to sell my house while I was still living in it. Then I turned away without answering. It was the only time in 42 years I'd chosen silence over words with my son. The officer guided Brent into the back of a patrol car. The door closed. The cars pulled away, sirens fading into the Nashville night. The warehouse felt twice as large when it was empty. Just me, Howard, and Detective Hayes, standing under harsh yellow lights that buzzed overhead, casting sharp shadows on concrete that still bore the tire marks from the truck. Hayes walked over carrying the black duffel bag, the one Gail had thrown at me 5 days ago. The one that had started everything. "We photographed the contents, copied everything," he said, holding it out. "It's yours to keep or burn. Your call." I took it. The bag felt lighter than it should have for something that had destroyed 3 lives. Howard looked at the bag, then at me. "What'll you do with it?" I set it down on the concrete floor, right where the stolen pallets had been stacked an hour ago. Right where my son had stood counting inventory he'd stolen from his own father. "The day they threw this bag at me and called it trash," I said quietly, "they handed over all their secrets themselves. The camera, the phone, the evidence. They gave it to me and told me to get out of their sight." I looked at the bag. Sometimes the very thing people want to hide most is found in what they discard easiest. Hayes nodded slowly. "Poetic justice." "Just justice," I said. Howard put a hand on my shoulder. "Let's go home." We walked toward the warehouse exit. Behind us, the empty building stood, silent lights, still buzzing evidence markers scattered across the floor. Ahead, the parking lot stretched dark and quiet. Howard and I walked through the warehouse door into the cold December air. Behind us, the empty building stood silent under yellow lights. Ahead, Nashville's skyline glittered in the distance. A CSX train horn blew long and mournful somewhere to the south. I didn't look back. Christmas Eve morning arrived quiet and cold, and for the first time in weeks, I had somewhere to be that wasn't a crime scene. Howard had driven me home from the warehouse the night before. We'd sat in his truck in my driveway for maybe 10 minutes, not talking, just breathing. The dashboard clock had read 10:47 p.m. when he finally squeezed my shoulder and said he'd call me tomorrow. I'd watched his taillights disappear down Elm Street before walking into the empty house. I'd slept for 4 hours. Dreamless, exhausted sleep that left me hollow but clear-headed when I woke. Now I sat in Margaret Foster's office on the 3rd floor of a downtown building, watching her flip through documents Detective Hayes had sent over early this morning. Margaret Foster was a civil attorney in her 50s who specialized in property fraud cases. She'd come highly recommended by Hayes. Professional, direct, no nonsense. She wore reading glasses on a chain and had the precise, methodical manner of someone who'd untangled complicated legal messes for 20 years. "The house can't be sold while criminal charges are pending," she said, looking up from the paperwork. "The court issued a temporary asset freeze at 8 o'clock this morning. As of right now, you can move back in. Legally, you're the resident. The property cannot change hands." "No, how long until it's really mine again?" I asked. 3 to 6 months. Courts move slowly, even with clear fraud." She set down the papers and folded her hands. "Your son signed transfer documents putting the house in his name, but we have evidence he forged your signatures on the original deed modifications. The district attorney is coordinating with our office. Once the criminal case establishes fraud, and it will, the civil court will reverse the transfer. The title goes back to you. 3 to 6 months. Not instant. Not a Hollywood ending where everything resolved in 24 hours. But it was movement. It was hope. It was the legal system working the way it was supposed to work. "What do I need to do?" I asked. "Live there. Pay the utilities. Document everything. Show continuous residence. Keep receipts." She handed me a folder. "The house is yours, Mr. Caldwell. It's just going to take time for the paperwork to catch up with the truth." I left her office at 11:30 a.m. and drove to the house. Brent's truck wasn't in the driveway. Gail's car was impounded as evidence. The front walk needed shoveling thin layer of snow from last night's dusting. I unlocked the door with my key. The lock turned smoothly. I stepped inside. Silence. No TV playing. No sounds from upstairs. No coffee maker gurgling in the kitchen. No voices. Just the house settling around me, the furnace kicking on the refrigerator, humming its steady rhythm. I walked through the rooms, slowly, deliberately. Kitchen Gale's book club schedule still on the refrigerator, a meeting marked for December 27th she'd never attend. Hallway photos on the wall of Christmases, past Brent's school pictures, arranged by Year Diane smiling in our wedding photo from 1981. Bedroom, the bed still made from 3 days ago when Gale had last slept here. Her jewelry box on the dresser now empty. Taken as evidence or packed in a rush, I didn't know which. Living room. The bare tree still standing in the corner where it had been since early December, waiting. Always waiting. I stood in the kitchen, where Gale used to make coffee every morning. The counter was empty, the dish rack dry. The house was silent. And for the first time, that silence didn't feel like loss. It felt like space to breathe. This is still my house, I said aloud to no one. I built the deck 15 years ago. I painted these walls. I chose the color. My voice echoed slightly in the empty kitchen. I can stay. At 3:30 p.m., as December afternoon light slanted golden through the windows, I opened the hallway closet and pulled out the Christmas ornament box. It was the same cardboard box Diane and I had used for 40 years. Reinforced with layers of packing tape Xmas written on the side in her careful handwriting with a black marker. I carried it to the living room and set it beside the bare tree. Sat down on the floor, my knees creaking in protest, and opened the lid. The ornaments were wrapped in tissue paper, each one nested carefully. I lifted them out one by one, unwrapping them like small gifts. A ceramic angel from 1985. Diane had bought it at a church bazaar the year Brent started kindergarten. A wooden snowman Brent had made in 3rd grade, his name carved carefully on the back in wobbly letters that broke my heart to read. A glass ball from our first Christmas in this house. Another from the year Diane got sick, the last one she'd hung herself. The ornaments clinked softly as I lifted them from the tissue paper. Some were decades-old, paint-chipped hooks, tarnished. My hands shook slightly as I held them, remembering. I hung them anyway. Gale had always done the tree. Every single year. She'd arranged the ornaments by color, by size, by some system only she understood. I'd sit on the couch and watch, offering to help, being told where to put things, when she finally allowed me to hang 1 or 2. 43 Christmases I'd just watched. This one was mine. I didn't arrange anything. Didn't plan. I just hung ornaments where they felt right. The angel near the top. Brent's snowman on a middle branch where I could see it from the couch. The glass balls scattered throughout. Diane's favorites in the spots where afternoon light would catch them and throw colors on the wall. It took me an hour. My back ached from sitting on the floor. My knees protested when I finally stood up, gripping the arm of the couch for balance. But the tree was decorated. I plugged in the lights. They blinked on soft white glow, filling the living room, reflecting off the ornaments, casting gentle shadows on the walls I'd painted, in the house I'd bought, in the life I was reclaiming, one small piece at a time. I stepped back alone on Christmas Eve, looking at the tree I'd decorated myself, in the house I was fighting to keep. For the first time in months, something felt right. I stood looking at that lit tree for maybe 10 minutes. Then I went to the kitchen and started washing the dishes that had been sitting in the sink for 3 days. That's when I heard the car pull up next door, Howard's niece helping him out 6 months after everything started. I dried my hands on a dish towel and walked to the living room window. A blue Honda Civic sat in Howard's driveway. A woman in her 40s, Karen Hastings, Howard's niece, was helping him out of the passenger seat. Howard moved slowly, carefully, but he was walking on his own. His niece stayed close, one hand near his elbow, but she wasn't supporting his weight. He was stronger than he'd been 2 days ago. I watched them walk to Howard's front door. Watched Karen unlock it. watched Howard step inside his own house for the first time in 6 months. Then I put on my coat and walked outside. The December air was cold and still. 4:30 in the afternoon, the sun already low. I crossed my yard to the fence that separated our properties. Howard came out his back door a moment later. We met at the fence line. Two old men in winter coats, breath misting in the cold. Howard looked at my house. At the Christmas tree visible through the living room window, lights glowing warm against the December dusk. "But your tree has lights now," he said. "Looks nice." "Put them up myself yesterday," I said. "Good, that's good." We stood there in silence for maybe 2 minutes. Not talking, just standing. Neighbors, friends. Two men who'd survived something most people never face. Finally, Howard nodded toward his house. "Better get inside. Karen's worried I'll freeze. Merry Christmas, Howard." Merry Christmas, Eugene." He walked back to his house. I walked back to mine. Friendship didn't need more words than that. Christmas Day arrived quiet and strange. I woke up at 7 o'clock in an empty house and realized this was the first Christmas in 44 years I'd spend completely alone. No Gail making her traditional French toast breakfast. No Brent stopping by mid-morning with coffee and pastries. No family dinner planned for the afternoon. Just me. The house. The tree lights still glowing from last night because I'd fallen asleep on the couch and hadn't turned them off. I made coffee and toast. Sat at the kitchen table with the morning light coming through the window and the soft hum of the refrigerator the only sound. No chaos, no voices, no tension. Just morning light and silence. Was this what peace felt like or just the aftermath? I didn't know. But I sat there for an hour drinking coffee, watching the light move across the kitchen floor, and found I didn't mind the quiet. At noon, I called Margaret Foster. I knew her office would be closed, but she'd given me her cell number. "Merry Christmas, Eugene," she answered. "Everything okay? Fictional. Just checking in, making sure the paperwork's still moving forward. It's filed. The court has everything. It just takes time now." "I've got time," I said. "Sound good. Enjoy your holiday. The house is yours. That's not changing." I hung up and looked around the kitchen. "First Christmas in this house that's really mine," I said aloud. The refrigerator hummed its agreement. December 26th arrived with my phone ringing at 10 o'clock in the morning. Detective Hayes's voice came through calm and professional. "Mr. Caldwell, wanted to update you on the charges." I sat down at the kitchen table. "I'm listening." Brent Caldwell, grand larceny and conspiracy to commit fraud. Class B felony. Sentencing range 8 to 30 years. I closed my eyes, opened them. Gail Caldwell, conspiracy to commit fraud and accessory after the fact. Class C and D felonies. Sentencing range 2 to 12 years. And Wade Mercer, grand larceny, conspiracy, and kidnapping under Section 39-13-303, Class A felony. He's looking at possible life sentence. The kidnapping charge changes everything. 3 people facing decades in prison. A son who might never speak to me again. A marriage 44 years long ended. Was justice worth this price? I didn't know. But I knew I couldn't have lived with silence. All 3 were denied bail. Hayes continued. Flight risk given the documented Belize planning. They'll remain in custody until trial. When's the trial? March 2024. You'll need to testify. Howard, too. We'll be there. One more thing, Hayes said. You should know Wade's attorney tried to argue he wasn't a flight risk. Prosecutor presented the September airline reservation. 1 ticket, December 26th, departure to Belize. I looked at the calendar on my kitchen wall. December 26th. Today. He was supposed to be on a plane right now, I said quietly. Instead, he's in a cell at Davidson County Jail. So are the other two. Funny how things work out. I hung up the phone and sat there at my kitchen table. On the counter, yesterday's newspaper sat folded. I'd brought it in but hadn't read it. I opened it now. Page 3, 3 charged in construction materials theft ring. The article listed their names. Brent Caldwell, 42. Gail Caldwell, 38. Wade Mercer, 43. December 26th, the Belize date. They should have been boarding a first-class flight this morning. Should have been landing in Belize City by afternoon. Should have been transferring stolen money to an offshore account and disappearing into a life of warmth and beaches and freedom bought with theft. Instead, they sat in jail cells, denied bail, awaiting trial, facing decades in prison. And I sat in the kitchen of the house they'd tried to steal drinking coffee, watching morning light through clean windows. I folded the newspaper and looked out the window at Howard's house next door. At the street I'd lived on for 44 years. At the neighborhood that had watched me raise a son, bury a wife, and survive a betrayal I'd never seen coming. One chapter had ended. Another was beginning. On January 3rd, 2024, I drove to the county jail alone. The parking lot was half-empty, gray and cold under a flat winter sky. A guard led me through 3 locked doors, and each one clanged shut behind me with a heavy metallic finality that pressed against my chest like something physical. They told me I had 15 minutes. 15 minutes to say everything or nothing. Brent was already sitting when they brought me in. Orange jumpsuit. Hands folded on a metal table like a man trying to hold himself together. He looked smaller than I remembered. Diminished somehow, as if the walls had already compressed something essential out of him. The arrogance I had witnessed in my living room on December 20th was completely gone, replaced by an expression I had to study before I could name it. Fear, perhaps, or genuine regret. I wasn't sure which, and I wasn't sure it mattered. "Dad," he said. His voice broke on that single word. I didn't answer right away. I looked at him carefully. This man I had raised, this son I had trusted with my home, my finances, my entire retirement. The man who had sat across from me at holiday dinners and Christmas gatherings while quietly engineering a plan to leave me with nothing. He and Gail and Wade had mapped out my ruin like a business project, and then Brent had planned to disappear to Belize while I discovered the damage. I pulled out the chair and sat down. "I need you to understand something," I said finally. "I'm going to say this once, then we're done talking about it." He nodded. His eyes were already red at the rims. "I am still your father," I told him. "Even though you chose not to be my son. What you did, what all 3 of you did, that doesn't disappear because you're sorry. It doesn't vanish because you got caught. You made a deliberate choice, Brent. You looked at my life, at everything your mother and I spent decades building, and you saw it as something available to take." "I know," he whispered. I won't forgive you," I continued. "Not today. Maybe not ever. But I won't abandon you either. That's the difference between us. I don't throw people away when they become inconvenient." He was crying by then, quiet tears, the kind that come when a person has no argument left. Some part of me, buried and instinctive, wanted to reach across that table the way I had when he was a child, and the world felt overwhelming to him. I remembered doing that. I remembered being the one who made things feel smaller and more manageable for him. But I kept my hands in my lap, and I didn't move. "Your mother would have wanted me to be here," I said. "So here I am. But don't mistake my presence for forgiveness. You'll serve your time. You'll live with what you chose to do. And when you get out, if you get out, maybe we'll talk again. Or maybe we won't. That decision belongs to the future, not to today." I stood up. The guard shifted near the door. "Dad, wait." I turned, Brent was on his feet, pressing both palms flat against the table as if steadying himself. "I'm sorry," he said. "I know it doesn't fix anything. I know it doesn't come close. But I'm sorry." I looked at him for a long moment. Then I nodded once, not absolution, not warmth, just acknowledgement. And I walked back through those 3 locked doors, each one opened and closed, until I was standing in the parking lot again, under that cold January sky, alone with the sound of my own breathing. Let me go back a few days. To New Year's Eve, Howard had invited me to his balcony to watch the fireworks over the lake. His niece Karen had already gone to bed worn out from traveling, so it was just the 2 of us, 2 old men in folding chairs with a bottle of bourbon between us and the whole dark water spread out below. "Hell of a year," Howard said, pouring us each 2 fingers. "Hell of a month," I corrected him. He laughed. Down at the lakefront, someone was already setting off firecrackers 20 minutes before midnight. The sharp reports echoed across the water and scattered into silence. "You ever think about what Diane would say?" Howard asked. About all of this, I took a sip of the bourbon. It burned warmly going down. Every single day. And she'd say I did the right thing. I stared out at the reflected lights trembling in the water. She'd say the truth matters more than comfort. That's how she lived her whole life. Howard raised his glass. To Diane, then. And to truth. We clinked glasses as the first real firework detonated overhead, a massive chrysanthemum of gold and silver that bloomed and shimmered and then dissolved into cascading sparks. I watched those sparks fall and thought about how things descend and how they sometimes rise again, how endings and beginnings can be the exact same moment viewed from different angles. "Oh, you know what the strangest part is," I said. "I feel lighter, like I've been carrying something heavy for 44 years without even realizing it was there." "What were you carrying?" "Just the weight of pretending everything was fine when it wasn't." Another firework burst red and blue this time, staining the clouds. Diane knew. She always knew when something beneath the surface was wrong. And now I understand why she kept those files, why she documented everything so carefully and quietly. She was giving me permission to finally see clearly. Midnight arrived. The entire sky filled with light and noise, a concussive symphony that made the night feel simultaneously like celebration and collapse. Howard and I sat without speaking and watched 2023 burn away into 2024, watched the old year consumed by fire and smoke, and then replaced by silence and the smell of gunpowder drifting across the water. So here is what I want you to understand, whoever you are, wherever and whenever you're encountering this story. They threw a trash bag at me, Brent Gale and Wade. They threw it at my feet and expected me to haul it to the curb without a second glance. That bag, that single act of carelessness or arrogance or perhaps some unconscious need to be caught, that is what saved me. Inside were bank statements, wire transfer receipts, documents that verified every lie, every theft, every calculated betrayal. The precise evidence they believed they had safely concealed was sitting in a garbage bag they tossed at an old man they no longer took seriously. And that is the lesson. The thing people most desperately want to hide is very often the thing they discard most carelessly. They grow confident. They grow sloppy. They assume no one will bother looking closely at what they've thrown away. But I looked. I am 70 years old. I have lost my wife, my savings, and in some fundamental way, my son. But I have not lost myself. I know who I am now in a way I simply didn't before all of this unfolded. I know what I'm capable of enduring and what I'm capable of doing when the truth demands it. They threw that bag at my feet and called its contents garbage. But inside that bag was the exact truth they had worked so hard to bury. Sometimes the very thing people fight hardest to conceal is found in what they abandon most easily. Sometimes the evidence of everything is sitting right there at the curb, waiting for someone willing to open it and look. I was that someone, and that made all the difference. And to you, listening to my story, remember this. The people closest to you can sometimes hurt you most, but that doesn't mean you stop seeking truth. For years, I trusted blindly. I handed my business to my son, believing blood meant loyalty. Don't make my mistake. Trust isn't something you give freely, it's earned and you verify. I should have looked at those bank statements years before Diane left them for me. But I was comfortable, and comfort made me careless. What I learned is that family justice isn't about revenge, it's about truth. When someone wrongs you, especially family, the hardest thing is choosing accountability over comfort. I believe God gave me that trash bag for a reason. He placed the evidence in my hands when I needed it. The lesson isn't just about catching thieves. It's about having courage to act when truth destroys everything you thought was solid. Dad's revenge stories like mine aren't about getting even. They're about standing up when standing down is easier. Family justice means holding people accountable even when it breaks your heart. So I want to hear from you. Have you faced betrayal from someone you trusted completely? What would you have done? Drop a comment. If this resonated, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And for more Dad's revenge stories about family justice and standing up for what's right, subscribe to Wise Revenge. Thank you for staying until the very end. One final note: while this story is based on real experiences, some details are fictionalized for storytelling. The core message about truth, accountability, and courage remains genuine.